Hello everybody and welcome to a slightly irregular video. If you know me, this is going to be something a little bit new. If you don't know me, welcome. I'm Gyoza Planet. I tend to make videos about video games. Shocking, I know. Sometimes it's coaching videos, sometimes it's guides. It varies from time to time. Today, however, is going to be a rather interesting video, and it's going to be a discussion on items in MOBAs, specifically items in League of Legends, and how I'm going to compare them to items in Deadlock. And it's going to look at their functions, how they're priced, how you acquire them, and their ability to impact your character in the game. So, first off, what do items do in MOBAs to kind of give us an idea of what they are and what exactly we're going to be looking at? Well, in MOBAs, there are three ways to access power scaling. More specifically, to improve the skills and damage output, really, of your character. Number one is levels. In most MOBAs, this is a statistic that kind of just goes up over time by being near dying enemies, at least in League, Dota, Heroes of the Storm, and Smite. In Deadlock, technically by standing next to minions, but in Deadlock, money and XP are the same thing. It's a little regular. I'm not going to get into it. That's a different video. But usually, when you level up, two things happen. Number one, you get an increase to your base statistics. So usually this means an increase to your physical damage. So physical damage, for the sake of this video, is going to be your auto attacks or abilities that deal physical damage. In League, this is known as AD, attack damage, and it's usually shown as orange damage to characters. And then there's ability damage, which is blue. In League, it's called magic damage. In Deadlock, it's called spirit damage, whatever. Do keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, ability damage and damage from abilities are not the same thing. So that's a very important distinction. But yeah, leveling up usually gives you an increase to your physical damage, your ability damage, your resistance to both physical and ability damage. It increases your base health, most likely, and occasionally self-regeneration, depending on your character in the game. And you also usually get a skill point, which you can invest into an ability to either unlock that ability or enhance it, giving it additional damage, shorter cooldowns, and in the case of Deadlock, unlocking specific power-ups when you hit a certain amount of ability points invested, milestones, basically. Then, in most games, you have objectives. Now, usually there are two categories of objectives. There are small objectives and there are big objectives. Small objectives would be something like the dragons in League, which are large monsters that spawn in, and once you kill them, you give your team a small stat boost for the rest of the game. Or at least the team that gets the kill gets a small stat boost for the rest of the game. So it could be you heal more and your shields have an increased value. It could be you move slightly faster and you attack slightly faster. It could be that you gain slightly more defense against physical damage and magic damage. It could be stuff like that. And then there's Dragon Soul, which is like a stronger version of those other effects. They're not super substantial, usually in terms of like a sheer statistical waste. They're about the same as having one item of the equivalent. So one attack damage item would be more or less so one of the cheapest option attack damage items would be the same as the buff you get from killing the Drake that gives you an attack damage boost, but it's a free boost and it doesn't take up an item slot, so you might as well. And then in Deadlock, you have the bridge buffs. They're basically large crystals that spawn in on the high bridges between the three different lanes. You punch the crystals and you get either a movement boost, so stamina recovery, movement speed, etc. Health, which is flat health and health regen. Ability damage and cooldown reduction, and then gun ammo and fire rate. So overall, it depends on what character you're playing. Some of them benefit from it more, some of them benefit from it less, but usually if you get them, you'll have a boost over your enemies. Then you have the big objectives for both games. In League, you have what's known as Baron Nashor, a Large purple eldritch creature. I don't know what the specifics are of what kind of thing it is. And what it does is that it takes a long time to kill. It's got a lot of health, but when you kill it, or more specifically, the team that kills it, because you can steal it, gets a boost to their attack damage. So keep in mind, all of this is for a duration. They get a boost to attack damage, ability damage. They empower all minions near them, and they get 1 faster recall to base. And usually this is a really big goal you also get an amount of gold and experience, I believe, as with killing any other monster or enemies. Now, keep in mind, this is a pretty big boost in terms of firepower, because usually at that stage in the game, it's 10 to 15% more damage, which can be enough to swing a fight, and it means that you need to land 1 less set of abilities, which pretty beneficial, especially if you're dealing with very mobile or very tanky enemies. So that's quite good. An empowered recall is fantastic because it means you can get back to base quickly, and it means that your team can split up into different lanes to pressure, and the boost that you give to minions means that you're encouraged to pressure lanes. And so with the Baron Nashor buff, what you can do is that you can take your increased firepower, your increased minion firepower, and your empowered recall, and that means that you can kill Baron Nashor, get back to base, get maybe an item or 2, or just restore your health and mana, and then you can push the side lanes. And even if the enemies try to contest you, perhaps they contest bottom lane and manage to kill whoever's pushing there. Middle lane and top lane are going to be able to knock down a couple of towers, or perhaps even take out a couple of inhibitors. And if they can take out inhibitors, then that means they start getting super minions, which spells really, really bad news for the enemies. So, yeah, it's... Sorry, small water. You will hear that occasionally. Getting Baron Nashor is very beneficial for a team, and it can swing a fight, where if you're behind in terms of like XP, stats, kills, and stuff like that, if your team is here able to get Baron Nashor while the enemy is distracted, or they don't have enough people to actually contest it, perhaps because of their team comp, perhaps because they're unorganized, then you can very much put the game back in your favor, and if you're able to push up a couple lanes, you'll have a tempo advantage, which is excellent because that means that you can kind of stabilize the playing field, and you can look for ambushes or large team fights and stuff like that, and try to push the fight so that you have the advantage instead. Now, in Deadlock, what you have is a mid-boss, which is large eldritch creature. Shocking, I know. It doesn't do much. You kill it, nothing really happens. There's an audio alert that goes out, but that's about it. But more importantly, the crystal that appears in the center of the arena is what you really want. It's called Rejuvenator, and it can be punched up to 3 times. Every time it's punched, the player who punched it, the team of the player who punched it gets 1 Rejuvenator stack, pretty much. Now what this does is that in the past it used to give you stat boost, not anymore. So it's not like Baron in that case. But what it does do is that it does give you 1 free revive per player up to 3, because you can hold up to 3 charges. Now, on paper, that's not too great. It's a free revive. Usually when you die, you're still in the middle of the enemies. It's not great. You don't get any stat boosts. You don't get better minions. It's not quite as impactful on paper as the Baron Nashor buff. However, in terms of how useful it is, it's actually quite impactful, because what it means is that, let's say your team gets the 3 Rejuvenators, excellent, and now you want to push the enemy base. Well, normally it's a bit of a commitment to do that, and if you play your cards wrong, your team is going to be taking a lot of damage from the minions and from the, enemy objective, and then you have the enemies who are running over to you to then shoot you and catch you as you try to escape, which means usually even if you're able to kill 1 or 2 of the enemies, and maybe take down their objective, you'll lose a couple of people on your team. However, if you have Rejuvenator, what you can do is that you can have, for example, the frontline tank goes in, and instead of going for the objective, they just try to focus down the solo defender that's there, while the other defenders are trying to catch up. And even if they die, even if that solo tank dies, what that means is that they've made a lot of space for their teammates to come in, take down the intercept the incoming enemy defenders, or focus and try to burst down the objective. And once they do, suddenly they can go and they can push, and or they can just escape, and they managed to take down an objective, but they've only lost one rejuvenator and no permanent deaths, which is excellent because then they aren't dead. That player isn't dead. They can go farm, they can go push lanes, they can do pretty much whatever. The enemy team didn't get a souls buff or a boost to one of their stats if they happen to be a character that scales infinitely. For example, Mo and Krill, his ultimate stuns you. If you die during it, whatchamacallit, he gets permanent maximum health. So that doesn't happen. Stuff like that. And what that means is that even if you don't use it to push an objective and you just use it to take a team fight, you basically have 9 players. It's instead of being a 6v6, it's a 9 versus 6. And in fact, usually it's a little bit more than 9 versus 6 because you have all those, you have the first 3 people, they're still doing this stuff, they're still shooting the enemy, using their abilities, etc., and wearing down the enemy's resources. So once they die and they come back with fresh health bar, fresh resources and stuff like that, and more importantly, usually the attention isn't on them if they're within the middle of a team fight, then suddenly they can go and just flip the tide again, and they've got a massive second wind. And usually that's enough that if you're playing at a level of play where people are fairly organized and they understand the basics and have mechanical skill, you can very much win, get a massive fight, or perhaps even win games outright with a team fight if your team has Rejuvenator. Now, I may make a video on that in the future, I don't know. But what we actually care about are the items now. In both games, and in pretty much every single MOBA that I know of that has items, looking at you, Heroes of the Storm, items are purchasable boosts to power that either give you a flat increase to your statistical numbers, an enhancement to your abilities, or a brand new ability, or an activatable, an active item, as in you press it, you activate it, and then it either triggers something or it gives you a boost during that duration. And usually these are a lot of how a MOBA functions, and they're also usually the most important part of getting better at a MOBA is knowing what items your character should build, and on top of that, knowing what items you need to counter build for an enemy character if they're extremely oppressive into you or your team, and also knowing what tempo you need to have for when you get items, which items you should be building first, second, third, etc., which items do you need in the moment, which items do you think you'll need, and such. Now, why am I picking League and Deadlock? Well, 2 main reasons. Firstly, I've played both of them. Admittedly, I haven't played much. Last time I played League was in 2020, and I was not very good. I was very young, and I did not understand how the game works. And I have less than 50 games in Deadlock. However, I do follow a concerningly large amount of content on both, and this varies from memes and compilations up to professional level games and full breakdowns and analyses. Yeah. Of that kind of thing, and most importantly, they are both very popular MOBAs. League is the quintessential, I believe is the word, definition of a top-down MOBA, and is the one that's the most prominent when somebody says MOBA. It's very famous, very well established, and it's very long-lived, such that it's got a lot of legacy behind it. Deadlock, on the other hand, brand new, technically isn't out yet. However, it's very innovative because it's a third-person hero shooter with... It's a third-person hero shooter set in a MOBA environment with MOBA mechanics, which is something that really hasn't existed yet. We've had Smite, we've had Paragon / predecessor, but realistically those are just third-person camera MOBAs. You can't jump, you can't mantle, your abilities have a very fixed range, There's no stamina, there's nothing like that. It's literally just a camera shift in MOBA. But Deadlock is absolutely not that. And what that leads to is that MOBA has to make a lot of, or not MOBA, Deadlock has to make a lot of changes and a lot of adaptations to how it functions because of this new change in system. And in the similar way that if you have like a breakout new artist who's very much pushing the limits of a specific category of art, it's very interesting to go and analyze them to see how are they managing to push the limits while still technically being within the defined category. And this is what Deadlock does, is that it very much pushes the boundaries of what's possible in a MOBA and what you can do in a MOBA, and it does it in a way that's very enticing and makes for an excellent game. It's highly respected and highly played. Now, admittedly, there isn't a fourth reason, which is the fact that Dota 2 kind of scares me. I've heard many things about the game, and most of them boil down to it's a very, very, very complicated game, and seeing as I do not have the time nor the sanity to learn Dota 2, I'm going to be benching it for this video, but I might come back to it in the future. We will see. Now, a very important disclaimer before I get into the actual, discussion itself. I'm not evaluating, and I will never be evaluating if one system is better than the other. That's not the point of this video, and that's not the point of any of the comments or discussions that will happen in the comments. Both of the games have item systems that are tailored and created for the way that they function. League has a more traditional item system based off of, decades of gameplay and it being a top-down MOBA, and Deadlock has a more creative item system due to the fact that it needs to be more creative, and it is inherently more creative in the way that it's designed. If you tried to put League's system in Deadlock, it would fail. If you tried to put Deadlock's system in League, it would fail. Also, I'm not evaluating the games against each other. They're both excellent games, but they have drastically different experiences when you're playing them. You cannot get the same feeling from League that you can from Deadlock, and vice versa. So please, in the comments, be civil, and please understand that there is no preference here or anything. It's simply a matter of analysis and understanding how both of the games function. Now, let's get started. First off, items in League. These are what I would like to call big power spikes, and that's the kind of philosophy that League follows for the items that it does. And what this means is that acquiring items usually marks a significant change in power for a character, either giving them massive enhancement to their statistics, or it's giving them access to a new range of capabilities with their kit and their abilities, such that either they can do things that they couldn't before, or the way that the kit operates is now much more fluid and they have a lot more a lot more freedom in what they do. They're not tied to just one or two combos or a very tight timing, etc., etc. This can be seen with a number of characters who, as the expression goes, come online once they have X number of items. What that means is that after they have 1, 2, 3, 4 items, etc., etc., they come online, which effectively means that they now have access to the full potential of their kit and the full range of gameplay. So that means that they can move how they want, they can attack how they want, they have enough health to suitably take fights or suitably assist their allies if in the case that they're a support character focused on supporting their team, and such. Or they might be a character that's just fine, but once they have those items, they now match or exceed other characters in terms of damage output or survivability, and that makes them much more powerful than their counterparts. Now, in League, how this manifests is that there are 3 tiers of items, and it's not really related to the in-game naming and everything. That's going to be the same for here and for Deadlock. Tier 1 is stat boosts, and these are usually the cheapest items you can get. It's stuff like Longsword, Ruby Gem, etc., etc. These are very simply increases to your numbers. Longsword, for example, is plus 10 physical damage, which means that your attacks now deal plus 10 physical damage. Slightly differently because abilities usually have a ratio, so it's like 50% of, it's like a flat amount plus 50% of your physical statistic, but that's usually how it works. They're not pretty, they're kind of bland, and they're not very good items in terms of like power potential, but they are very cheap, and that's what benefits you. They also, for the like slightly more advanced ones, for example, pickaxe, which is more expensive longsword and gives you better stats and everything like that, it's more cost effective to have a variety of items and one pickaxe than to have lesser variety plus 2 longswords, because in League you can only hold 6 items, and usually this is going to be a couple of items, like a couple of these smaller tier 1 or tier 2 items, a potion, and then if you have runes for it, perhaps a consumable item. So 1, if not maybe 2 consumable items, and that can stack up very quickly for not managing your items well. So upgrading to a slightly more powerful stat boost item is usually a good idea, because if your gold is just sitting in your bank account, it's not doing much. It's better to have the numbers and no gold than just a ton of gold. Then, the second category of item are what I would like to call small change to gameplay items. For example, Fated Ashes, I believe is how it's pronounced. What this item does is that every time you hit an enemy, or I believe it's every time you deal ability damage, if I'm not mistaken, you apply a burn to the enemy. It's a very small burn. It's like 3 damage a second for like 5 seconds, so 15 damage overall. I believe it does stack, and it's a little bit more effective against like jungle monsters, because they have much more health than a character than an enemy player does. But what it is it's not very impactful. It's not going to single-handedly win you a fight, but what it does is that it does give you a boost in tempo. If you have this, suddenly what it means is that you might only need 9 abilities to kill an enemy instead of 10, and needing to land 1 less ability is actually pretty good. It means that, let's say as an example, the enemy is playing a character that wants to and needs to play aggressive. So they dive you, and they have like a lot of movement items, so they run at you, deal a lot of damage, and then back up. Or they run at you, grab minions, deal some damage, and then back up. Normally, let's say both of you have no items and everything like that, because of how kits in League are designed, it's quite possible that you'd either always be losing, as in you gain less benefit from the trades that they take, or it'd be net even, but you have to expend a resource like mana, health, or perhaps your consumable items. And usually that means that, and like in case of attrition, so over a long period of time, they're going to win and they're going to take advantage, which means they can get a kill on you and they'll start taking the lead and snowballing. However, if, for example, you have Fated Ashes, what that means is that suddenly when they make those trades and you hit them with an ability or 2 and everything, and you apply that burn, suddenly either the trades are 50-50 or suddenly they're in your favor, which is a really big problem for them, because that means that even if they go in and usually they have to go in because their abilities are short-ranged, or they require an enemy in proximity, or they just want to get last hits on minions for gold, you're going to perhaps not deny them, but you're going to punish them for that. And over time, what that leads to is that it means you'll have the advantage, and perhaps they misplay, they make an accident or something, and you can take advantage of that, and they'll be missing an extra 100, 150 health from all of the abilities you've been landing earlier, and that means that you can punish them and get the kill on them all of a sudden, which for characters that usually buy this kind of item, it's very beneficial, because now they have a little bit of an advantage, and usually, since they struggle so much in the early game because of League design philosophies that I'm not going to get into, it can help them kind of break even, or perhaps get a small edge when they get into mid-game and to late game. Now, the third category of item is what I would like to call large changes to gameplay, and these are what's in-game called legendary items. They're the most expensive, and they have the most drastic impact on your gameplay. Now, this item right here on the slideshow is an item called Death's Dance, and it is a very strong item, which, one moment. What it does is that It varies if you're playing melee or ranged. We're going to be taking melee as an example. What it does is that when you have the item, it gives you a number of stats. It gives you um, attack damage, defense, ability haste, which is shorter cooldowns. And then it also has a unique passive. And the unique passive is that 30% of all damage you take, slightly modified because of calculations, but not the point, is stored in a meter, and that meter is dealt as a bleed over 3 seconds to your health bar. However, if you get a kill, the bleed is completely, all stored bleed is completely nullified. It's just gone. Which is great because usually that's a pretty hefty amount of damage you'd be taking otherwise. And two, you get a pretty hefty heal based off of one of your statistics. It's either your attack damage or your health. Now, what this allows you to do is that what it means is that suddenly you have about 30% more health against anyone you're jumping at. And what this means is that for like bruiser type characters, so usually like melee characters that are pretty chunky and either have defensive abilities or a lot of health or a shield, and usually like a dash or two, and that very much like being up in your face and deal a lot of physical damage. This is an excellent item because what it means is that when they're chasing down longer range enemies, or enemies that are faster than them, perhaps tanks, or they're trying to catch assassins and stuff like that, the assassin can go in on them and do a full combo, and instead of taking 60% of their health bar, they only take 40%, and then the rest of it is stored as a bleed. And if they're able to retaliate during that time, the assassin is doing their combo, and then they go and chase down the assassin, suddenly they can pretty much nullify a good chunk of what the assassin did. Or it can lead to kill chains. For example, let's say you have 3 enemies lined up in a row that are all attacking your bruiser character. Normally, let's say without this item, they just have like tier 1 or tier 2 items. They could go perhaps kill the first person, maybe kill a second person, depending on their abilities, like both of the abilities of all 4 characters in the scenario. If the bruiser uses their ultimate or their summoner spells or not, etc., etc. But realistically, they might get 1, maybe 2, but they're probably not getting 3 if they just have tier 1 and tier 2. However, if they have the tier 3, what they can do is that they can go, they can fight, deal a ton of damage, and they kill the frontmost target, so target number 3. What this means is that suddenly most of the damage, or not most, but a good chunk of the damage that they've been taking from all 3 targets has been stored up in this bleed. It's now gone. They've also gotten a pretty big heal, and there's 1 less person shooting and attacking them. And also, depending on the character, maybe they get small buff, but let's say they're playing one that doesn't, to make this a little simpler. Now it's 1 bruiser versus 2 enemies. They run down target number 2, they kill them. They took less damage, so there was less bleed to get rid of, but let's say it was still a pretty decent amount of bleed. So they get rid of that. They get another heal, and now it's just a 1 versus 1, the bruiser versus target 1. And realistically, them being so far back usually means that they were a very squishy character with not many mobility tools or not many escape options, which means that usually the bruiser can go and then kill target 1, and they've now gotten 3 kills instead of just 1 or 2 and then dying, which is really nice, and is also like a drastic change in your potential power. And this is like the overall power of these category of items, is that it can fundamentally change what your character is capable of with just 1 item. But it has to be that item. It's not the combination of the items before. It has to be that specific item, and usually that comes at a pretty big cost. Now, how does it translate to, let's say, the timeline of a game? This is a rough estimate, by the way. It's not based off of actual factual data because I don't have that. But let's say, so the x-axis here, so horizontal axis is time elapsed, and vertical axis is approximate power of a player. So we start off early, and we have this sharp incline. This is going to be levels 1 to 3. When you're getting your ability, you're getting access to your full kit. And as you can see here, it plateaus slightly, and then it jumps again. Plateaus, jumps. And usually these small jumps are when you get early game kills, or gold, or you go for you go back to base and you get tier 1 and tier 2 items, which they're not giving you a massive boost, but it's enough to give you an advantage in lane and enough to give you an edge such that you're able to push the tempo in your favor. Then you have this large spike right here, the first large spike, and what this is usually when you get your ultimate and or when you get your first item. And both of them are very impactful for characters. For a number of them, you live and die by your ultimate, actually. And then also getting your first item here can be very impactful, especially for like top lane characters or mid lane. Maybe not mid lane, but like jungle characters, for example. It can very much help them ambush enemy lanes, be more effective in their clearing, etc., etc. And so, as you can see here, they're like in the course of like 10-15 seconds, they've suddenly gone up like 10, 15, 20% like a power potential, which is a lot. And what that means is that, let's say you zone very well in the early games up here, you manage to like trade well with your combos, and you manage to deny your enemy like, let's say, 5 minions. So 5 caster minions, which give 14 gold, so that would be, it's roughly like 70 gold. And let's say both of you trade, you're both low health, you both go back to base. It's quite possible that both of you go back to base. You have enough gold to get a tier 3 item. They can only get tier 2 and tier 1 items. Both of you come back to base. You will be up here on the upper echelon of this power scale, and they are going to be on the lower part. And just because you managed to deny them items, you can very much just run them down, like as long as you're not playing like an idiot, you can very much just run them down. And even if both of you have the same amount of EXP, same amount of levels, just because you managed to get a 1 tier 3 item, you have a huge advantage over them. Because they just have tier 2 and tier 1 items. And as the game progresses, you can see that the slopes are usually level ups, mostly level ups, and then the spikes are when you get your next couple of items. And as you can see, there are very big jumps here, which means that like a character with like, let's say up here, 3 items versus a character with 2 items, obviously depends on the character and the matchup, but it can very much, like, just the fact that they have 3 tier 3 items can push the advantage and make it so that they just win the fight, even if they're both the same level of skill, same level of EXP, same level ups, just as is. Because they have that tier 3 item, they're going to win the fight, which what that leads to is that in League, like, making sure you're not missing out on too much gold, or ideally any gold, and also going for early kills is very, very impactful, because even getting one kill on a player is 300 gold, which is like, I mean, that's 1/10 the cost of a tier 3 item that's just suddenly been evaporated. And it means that you need like 2 waves less to get a tier, tier 3 item. So that means that your enemy player could even be down here on the like rising part here, and just because you got 1 kill on them, you can go back to base, and suddenly you're on the upper part here with a full tier 3 item. And usually you can snowball that lead enough to give yourself a huge impact and use it to gain a lot of momentum, such that the enemy can't really retaliate much, or if they attempt to, they get crushed either with the assistance of your team, or just because your character is very like high, if it's like an assassin, for example, very high damage output. And if you're playing, like, if you have enough tier 3 items before the enemy has tier 3 items of the like to make themselves strong and to counter pick you, like that go against, that like are specifically designed to counter you, they literally just can't do anything. Even if they like use crowd control on you, use ultimates on you and everything, you just have so much damage output from having more tier 3 items than them, that you're inherently going to win the fight. And especially in early game, like in lower tier games, you can very much see this, where you have one character who gets a lot of kills early on because the enemy is making a lot of mistakes, or because it's a bad matchup in terms of characters, and they're suddenly going to be 1 or 2 tier 3 items ahead of everybody in the game, and they can do pretty much anything. They can go where they want, they can attack any lane they want, and the entire enemy team suffers because of this, and they can usually push lanes, get dragons, get Baron Nashor, and the game is over really quickly. Now, admittedly, in higher ranks, this usually doesn't happen because most of the players there are able to use some of the comeback mechanics, and also usually just let their teammates who are slightly behind go and get gold from minion waves and stuff like that, while the higher level players go and like did not defend them, but like kind of hover around them, ready to intercept that perhaps super strong character. And they also have enough of a knowledge of like abilities and of the various characters that they can early on, like perhaps their their first tier 3 item, instead of buying like something that's purely beneficial, it's 50% beneficial, 50% counter pick. But that's mostly for higher tier gameplay, and it's not going to apply to a lot of people seeing this video. Now, that was League. In Deadlock, however, items are a lot more iterative. What this means is that you'll get the first version of an item, then you'll upgrade it later on to a better version, usually with a new effect perhaps, and then you'll get it to yet another version with even more effects. Now, there are multiple tiers of items, and they aren't really numbered here because it's a lot more fluid. Overall, the item system in Deadlock is a lot more fluid and a lot more malleable compared to Leagues, which is very much, it's like step 1, step 2, you've got a tier 3 item. Step 1, step 2, you've got a tier 3 item. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, you've got a tier 3 item, etc., etc. And League is very much mix and match and do however you want. But saying that, the various tiers are, you have flat stat boosts. These are usually just plus X to number, plus X to physical damage, plus X to ability damage, just that. But interestingly enough, there are some very pricey items that are just flat stat boost. For example, the item Boundless Spirit, what it does is that it gives you a large increase to your spirit power, which is your ability. It's not your ability damage, it's technically a number that affects ability damage and duration and stuff like that, but for the sake of this argument, I'm going to say your ability damage. And it also gives a multiplier to any other increases of ability damage you have, which is pretty good for characters that benefit from ability damage. But this is a category 4 item in Deadlock. This is a very expensive item. But it's still a stat flat boost. Now, admittedly, in League, there are a couple of items that are just flat stat boosts, but those are very, very rare. Most tier 3 items in League are large change to gameplay items that drastically affect how your character work, and there aren't very many flat stat boosts. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, there are a decent number more of them. Then you have large or conditional flat stat boosts. This would be an item like, and again, these are across the entirety of the game. You have very cheap ones, for example, Headshot Booster, which is, no, that's wrong one. Mystic Regeneration. Mystic Regeneration, every time you deal ability damage, you get a small amount of healing over time. Which is, it's cheap, it's beneficial. If you deal ability damage inherently as a character, you're going to benefit from it because it's a little bit of healing over time. But then you also have pretty hefty conditional flat stat boost, which would be something like Burst Fire, which is, it comes with a couple of beneficial stats on its own, but its main appeal is that when you shoot an enemy, you get a pretty hefty boost to your fire rate for the next couple of seconds, which, if you're playing characters that benefit from having a very high fire rates, this is excellent. But this, yet again, this is a category 3 item. It's the not most expensive, but it's like second most expensive category in the game, but it's still a conditional flat stat boost. And then you have some more expensive ones, which I can't think of any at the time, but yet again, much like the flat stat boosts, it's iterative. You can have very cheap conditional flat stat boosts, but you can also have very expensive flat stat boosts, and sometimes they're upgrades of each other. So you have Yet again, you have Mystic Regeneration, which is a little bit of healing over time, but then you have the Upgrade, which is a lot of healing over time when you deal ability damage. Then you have the small change to gameplay. This would be something like extra regen, which not a great example because it's technically a flat stat boost, but it would be something like Mystic Burst. Mystic Burst is an item that when you deal above X amount of ability damage, you get that ability now deals a little bit extra ability damage. So it's like if you deal more than 100, the move that hits the enemy deals an extra 25 ability damage, which is pretty good, especially if you have characters that have very high hitting, perhaps long cooldown, but high hitting ability damage. Then you have moderate change to gameplay category items, which yet again, usually what these do is that they change your kit enough that you'll be able to play differently and you have access to new opportunities as a character, but they're not so significant that they drastically alter or give you massive amounts of freedom as a character. This would be something like Cultist Sacrifice, which what it does is that it lets you target one non-playable character on the map, you kill them, you get their money, you get their 150% of their money, so their value in money times 1.5, and then you get I believe it's physical damage, ability range, and movement speed for a duration, and it's like 180 seconds, so 3 minutes, which is means two things. Number one, you didn't have to sit there and take the health damage plus ability costs, because you're going to be using abilities to kill the very large jungle monsters, because they are very, very healthy, especially when you're just at the start or partway through mid game. For most characters it takes a lot to actually kill them, so you're able to skip all of that, all of the health costs tied, all of the ability cooldowns tied to that. You get their value in money and more, and for the next couple of minutes you gain an assortment of buffs, which is really nice because that means you don't have to spend your money getting those buffs from other items. You can spend that money on different buffs or save them up for a much larger item, such as the example. Then the last category is the same large change to gameplay, and usually these are very massive changes to gameplay, and interestingly enough, in Deadlock, what the large change to gameplay items offer you is on a much higher scale than what you can achieve in League. This doesn't go for all items, obviously, but there are certain items that are much stronger in terms of what they offer you than what you can do in League. Case in point, you have the item Unstoppable. This gives you additional health and some kind of resistance, I believe, as an inherent stat of buying it. But the main appeal is that it gives you, when you activate it, it gives you the Unstoppable buff for 5 seconds, I believe. Now, what Unstoppable does is that, as you can guess from the name, you are completely immune to all crowd control effects, any stuns, any slows, any movement impairments, most ultimates that might hinder you. It is very, very strong. And this means that you have characters who might have a character like Haze, who their ultimate makes them very vulnerable. They're very slow. They're very slow in one spot. They've got a very fixed range to hit characters with their ultimate. It's kind of and if you happen to have a ranged crowd control ability, you can kind of just shut down the Haze. But if you get a Haze with Unstoppable, suddenly what they are is that they're an entire exclusion zone. Anybody in the area is going to take massive damage, so you're very much incentivized to leave that area, and usually this can make teams scatter pretty heavily, and that means that all the allies of the Haze, while the Haze is still standing there being a massive threat for the next couple seconds of her ultimate, all of her allies can now chase down those people that might have either taken a hefty amount of damage from the Haze or were just scared off by her ultimate, and they're able to isolate them and then kill them, because usually it's 2 versus 1 or it's a 1 versus 1, but they're chasing, and usually when you're chasing you have an advantage, and that is a massive boost in terms of what you can accomplish. And there are there are other characters, like bruiser type characters, the same kind who would buy like the Death's Dance from League. They can buy this, and suddenly they can very much just run at an enemy and deal a huge ton of damage up close and personal and then bail out. Whereas if they didn't have Unstoppable, they would normally be crowd controlled and then just absolutely decimated. Now, keep in mind, the closest thing League has to this is there is a summoner spell that removes all crowd control effects on you. There is an item, one tier 3 item that gives you mediocre stats as part of buying it and gives you one cleanse, so it's the same thing like the summoner spell. It gives you, I believe it's like on a 100-second cooldown, but you can nullify one crowd control effect on you, and then you have one or two ultimates in the game that give that specific character, mind you, Unstoppable. But Unstoppable in Deadlock, anybody can buy it, and with that, it's absolutely insane just the amount of potential you can have. Because in League, it's a much toned down version of this. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, it's accessible to anybody, and admittedly, it is the highest price, but it's very, very powerful at being that price. Now, interestingly enough, Deadlock also has an additional system, which is the investment system. What that means is that the more money you put into one of the 3 categories, so either weapon damage, so either orange category, which is weapon related stuff, green category, which is health and movement, and then purple category, which is your abilities. The more money you put into each category, the more you gain of a specific statistic. If you put it in orange, you'll gain just free weapon damage. If you put it in green, you'll gain free, it's scaling health. This is an old photo. And you put it in purple, you'll gain flat spirit power, which is the number that affects your ability damage and cooldowns and other stuff depending on the character you're playing. But what's very interesting here and what's very, very important is that it does not care what item you buy in that category. All it cares about is that you buy an item from that category. So, very importantly, if I am in the green category, I can buy 3 movement-related items. I can buy I believe it's Stamina Mastery, which means I get more dashes and I can dash more midair. I can buy Warp Stone, which is an item that it's a free short range blink, which is like I hope you know what a blink is. And then I can buy Enduring Speed, which gives me some stats, and then it gives me resistance to movement slows. I can buy all of that. None of those are health-related items, but I'm still getting a pretty hefty chunk of health from buying that. And this is, quite frankly, an absolutely ingenious system, and it's also very, very much necessary for how Deadlock functions, because there are so many items in Deadlock. Admittedly, Deadlock has more options. I believe your maximum is 12 items compared to League 6, and you're also buying items at a much more different frequency. But whatchamacallit, the way that the investment system works means that you, instead of having to buy items that give you some of what you want for your character and then some perhaps unnecessary statistics, which can happen a lot in League, where you're buying, like, let's say your character who benefits from physical damage. There are a couple of items you can buy with physical damage tied to them, but they might have something like magic resistance or like ability damage resistance nullification, which none of the enemy team has magic resistance, so it's kind of useless to you. But I mean, the physical damage on it is pretty nice, so you buy it for that. Or you're buying an item that gives you a ton of health, and then like a passive that gives you movement speed when you crowd control an enemy. You don't have any crowd control in your kit, but the health itself is pretty beneficial, and it's got a couple of other nice stats on it. Now, this isn't too common. As you go up the ranks and become more experienced, you'll know specifically what items your character wants that has a mix of miscellaneous stats tied to it, plus an inherent passive specifically for tier 3 items, and the inherent passive that makes them tier 3 items that benefits you. But as you're going up the ranks, there are many times where you might just buy an item because it gives you a couple of things that you want, and then the other parts of it are pretty much useless for you. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, you don't really have that. You can be, for example, a character. Let's take Viper, for example. Viper is a close range, highly focused, like her entire thing is using the sliding mechanic. She has enhanced slides and a ton of stamina. And she gets, in Deadlock, you get infinite ammo when you slide, and Viper has a very high fire rate, very high spread weapon. So she wants to be in people's face, and she wants to be sliding a lot. So she wants to buy movement-based items. Now, if she were a character in League, this would be a problem because she wants to buy movement items, but she also needs to buy health items. Otherwise, she's just gonna blow up. She has no defensive stuff in her kit. She would, if she were to buy just movement items in League, she would just go boom, because even if she can get up close and deal a ton of damage, so can the enemies, and usually they can deal more damage to her than she can to them. Or if she gets hit with one crowd control ability, she's just instantly dead without being able to do anything. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, she can buy those 3 movement items I was talking about before, and not only is she now faster, and her kit has come online, as I was explaining before. She has pretty much full reign and freedom to slide around as she wants, and she has the stamina to consistently keep sliding and keep getting access to infinite ammo to make her weapon work. But she's also getting a pretty hefty chunk of health tied to it, so that means that not only can she get closer to her enemies to make her kit work, when she does, she's not quite as weak as she would be if the investment system didn't exist. So overall, I think there is also the special investment. This is specifically at 4,800 souls, and what this is that compared to the previous tiers, it is a large jump in value. Usually, for most of them, it's about a 2 times jump in value, because usually between tiers, it's like a 10% jump. So, for example, like 10 to 20% jump. I mean, it depends on the categories, but usually it's a small jump. But 4,800 is a very large jump, and what this does is that these are pretty good numbers, even if I'm a fully ability damage focused character. An additional 50% weapon damage is pretty nice. It means that when I'm shooting my enemies while my abilities are on cooldown, I need like a full magazine less to kill them, which is really nice, because usually a full magazine is like 6 seconds of shooting an enemy, depending on which ability damage focused character you're playing. So what the system does, specifically, not the investment system, but the special investment does, is that it incentivizes branching out slightly into other categories to get that boost, because even if it isn't something you inherently care about for your character, it's still enough of a stat change to affect your character in the background and make your fights overall easier, and maybe you stay alive longer. For example, the green category, you might be a character that specifically focuses on orange items, but if you grab if you grab just a few green items, you'll get a pretty good boost. And importantly enough, what this also does is that this makes more diversity in builds, and also makes for more interesting items. Say, for example, I am a orange category, so weapon damage, so physical damage focused character. Most of what I'm going to be buying is in the orange category and the green category. But I'm still going to want a couple of things in, the purple category. So I can go browsing through there, and surely enough, there are actually a couple of items that benefit me from the purple category. Let's say, for example, I pick up the item Bullet Resist Shredder. What this does is that when I deal ability damage to an enemy, they take more weapon damage for a short duration. Hey, that's really nice for me. I have abilities that I can use to deal ability damage, and most of my damage output comes from a weapon. So, just by using my kit the way that's intended, and by owning this item, I'm working towards that boost in spirit power from the special milestone, but I'm also getting more benefit to my kit. And additionally, there's another item, for example, a Quicksilver Reload, which is that when I use an ability, I get a free reload of my magazine and a small, stat boost for a short duration. Hey, that's really nice. Yet again, I tend to use my abilities when I'm firing my weapon. This is really great. I can fire my weapon, use my ability, I get a free reload, so I don't have to spend time reloading, I don't have to go for a risky melee, and I'm also working towards the special investment. So overall, I think it's actually a pretty clever item. It's a pretty clever system to allow and encourage more build diversity, and also a little bit more exploring and like thinking about your builds, which is a part of where Deadlock shines. Is like a lot of like the build making, where it's a lot more elaborate and it's a lot more obviously tuned to the player, but it's a very, very creative, such that two players can have completely different builds, and it's not just because they have different play styles, but it's because they've been thinking about it and they do the math differently. For one of them, there's a couple of items in the spirit category that they really want. That gets them to their special investment, and then they go over to weapon category and they buy a couple of things. And for a different player, they might buy less items from that spirit category, still enough to get the spirit investment, but maybe not to the 1 or 2 milestones beyond that, but instead they're going to go to the green special investment and then a couple tiers beyond that, because they prioritize movement on that character rather than stronger abilities or perhaps debuffs, which is a large part of what the spirit category in the shop offers. Now, what does it look like in game? Well, overall, in Deadlock, the power scaling of a player is a lot more fluid compared to League, and this is for a couple of reasons. So, I will get to the explaining the shops, but first I'm going to explain the power scaling. So, overall, yet again, same thing, horizontals, time elapse, vertical axis is a power of the player. So, down here we have the start of the game, and as you can see here, it's fluctuating. Now, unlike League, it's not a fixed line, and this is because, I'm going to jump ahead a bit. I'm going to explain this first, and I'm going to get back to the other one. In League, there's exactly one shop that you can go to get items, and that is the one at home base. There is exactly one character who is an exception to this, but I'm not going to talk about them because this is not a character review. But what this means is that if you want to get items, you need to either be at home base or dead. And usually you don't want to be dead, so you want to be at home base. What this means is that unless you die early on and you can buy items because you've effectively gone to home base because you respawn at home base, what this means is that you have to make the commitment to recall to base and then walk all the way back to lane and up to where you are, if you want to get an item. And what this does is that this staggers out when you're going to get items to be much more, yet again, big milestones, big power spikes. You're not going to go back to base every 30 seconds or like the moment you clear 1 or 2 waves of minions, because it's a little ridiculous, and also you waste a ton of time and you lose out on a ton of experience, especially if the enemy is very skilled at manipulating how the minions interact and making you miss XP, miss gold, dealing damage to your tower, dealing damage to you, such like that. In Deadlock, however, what's really interesting is that you have, while the Guardians are still alive, that's a very important distinction here. Each one of these has a shop, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, team specific, mind you. I can't be on the lower half here and then jump into the enemy Guardians area to try and buy at their shop. They don't allow that. But still, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shops. Then you have the 2 home base shops, 7, 8, and then you have the 2 secret shops, which are supposedly secret. They're a little bit out of the ways and they require a little bit of parkour to get to. But what this means is that when you are fighting in lane, you are quite literally 10 seconds away from a shop. Not even 10 seconds. You can literally be standing in the shop and still be shooting minions. And what this means is that, one moment, when you're playing Deadlock, The power scaling is a lot more fluid because you're getting a lot more small incremental items. You're going to be getting a lot more of the, what would be the tier 1 items from League. These are the 800 soul items, or maybe the 1600 soul items in Deadlock. You're going to be able to get those items with a lot more ease, actually, because you're quite literally a couple of steps away from the shop. And so what that leads to is that there is a lot more fluidity in the process of getting items. It's quite possible that in one game of Deadlock, I buy additional healing as my first item because I'm against a very high damage characters. I buy additional mobility as my second item, and then I buy perhaps a little bit of resistance as my third item in one game. And then perhaps on the very next game, same character, same buddy in my lane, same enemies I'm going, or like perhaps different enemies I'm going into. Suddenly my first item is going to be additional fire rate because I know I can punish the enemies more because it's a different lineup. My second item is going to be a different kind of healing, perhaps more aggressive, like more aggressively focused healing. And then my third item is going to be, let's say, for example, I'm going to save up a lot of money, and then I'll get that cult to sacrifice because me and my ally did very well in lane. We were able to pressure the enemies, and we were able to knock down their guardian very early. So that gives us a massive advantage in the way that the lanes are going. Or let's say we don't even knock down the guardian, we just deal a lot of damage to them. We're always keeping the enemies on the back foot. We have the control of the surrounding area, and that includes their jungle camps and the boxes and other miscellaneous sources of money around the area, which is very beneficial for us. So I can save up a good amount of money and then go and get an item like Cult to Sacrifice, because even if I'm losing a little bit of short-term power, I can do that. I can make that sacrifice because I'm ahead, and the tempo is currently favoring me. And then once I get that item, I'm going to be able to take that as leverage to push the tempo even further. Now, that's for the start of the game, and as you can see here, there's another very large spike here, and this is usually when you get your ultimate, because, yet again, for a lot of characters, their ultimate is what they live and die by. Dynamo, for example, is a very competent support. He's got a move that knocks back enemies, a move that gives him and an ally temporary invincibility, and a pretty hefty heal in an area. But what he's really known for is his ultimate, which is a massive area of effect stun that stuns everybody who's caught in it, and once it's upgraded enough, deals maximum health based damage, which once you get later on in the game is very significant because people have pretty big health bars by then. So once he gets this, he suddenly becomes a very formidable foe in lane, because if he gets close enough to you, admittedly this is a very large gamble, it's like a 4-minute cooldown if he misses, but if he doesn't, he's pretty much guaranteeing his ally to be able to get a kill on you and or your buddies, and then he can take that advantage to then kill all your minions and then pressure the wave and perhaps knock down the guardian. Then throughout the rest of the game, it is yet again this more fluid philosophy compared to League, because yet again, even when you have these the guardian shops are taken away, you still have these two very centralized shops that you can very easily access. Like as you can see here, all these little arrows and everything like that. These are the boxes, are the slot machines that you punch to get money, and then the little arrows are the camps with the jungle monsters. I can very much easily, as you can see here, take a route through here, kill all of these minions, get all these boxes and everything like that, and then I just make a quick turn, and then boom, I'm at a shop. I don't have to go all the way back to base, I don't have to wait to die. So that means that I can clear out the minions here. I can buy a couple items, and then I can go and I can steal the enemies. I can go and steal stuff from the enemy's jungle, because I just happen to be in the area. So that makes for very fluid. It also becomes much more fluid because of the fact that it's very iterative items. What this means is that you can very much get over the course, you can save up for very large items, or you can buy a plethora of small items, but because of the investment system, it's the same amount of money spent, so you're still getting that boost in whichever of the three categories, and depending on the character, it's still going to be very beneficial for you. And I'm going to talk about this. Okay, that's actually, hold on, I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But still, it's very much fluid, and it's very much like kind of read the pulse of the game and going off of the tempo. Another interesting thing that Deadlock allows is that there's a lot more counter building possibilities in Deadlock compared to League. In League, usually if you're counter building, it's a pretty hefty commitment, and yet again, you have to make the choice of usually going for an item that's 50% beneficial toward you and 50% punishing the enemy. But even then, it's usually not a very significant punishment, and it's also you're losing a little bit of stats. It's enough such that you can maybe perhaps survive an attack from them, or deal more damage to them, cut down their health a decent amount, but it's not a lot. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, you can very easily. There is an item in the game called Metal Skin, which, as the name implies, gives you metal skin and makes you completely immune to bullets for 5 to 8 seconds. Now, if you're playing against someone like Hayes being a very gun-focused or physical damage-focused character, this pretty much shuts her down for 8 seconds, and especially if you use that while she's in her ultimate, she might still be able to deal damage to you via items that trigger ability damage when she's hitting you with her ultimate, but still, you're going to nullify 80% of her damage. And if you're a character that has a lot of very up-close damage, suddenly you're a massive threat. And so you're now pressuring Hayes, and you're saying, hey, you've committed a resource of your ultimate. I'm going to counter commit the resource of my item, and now I'm forcing you to make a choice. Do you want to sit here and wait out my item, whilst you're most likely going to die because I have the higher close range damage and I'm currently immune to your high close range damage, or do you want to cancel your ultimate and have it go on a long cooldown, but you're able to actually escape and stay alive? There are also items like Cursed Relic, which is literally you point at a player and it's like, congratulations, you can't attack, you can't fire your weapon, or use any abilities for 6 seconds. It's like 4 seconds, I think, which is very, very, very oppressive. And for a number of characters that like to commit fully, or that are very, very strong and usually rely on getting stacking up a lot of buffs and stuff like that, you can very much just shut them down and be like, yeah, no, you've lost all of your buffs now, and you have to build them back up, wait for the items to go off cooldown, wait for your abilities to go off cooldown, especially if it's a character that has very long abilities. Having them commit those abilities and then perhaps shutting them down mid-ability usage or nullifying the ability's impact at all is very, very beneficial. And usually, even if you buy these items, alongside getting a couple miscellaneous stats, it's still enough. It's only one slot of 12, which is part of the reason that you're able to do this in Deadlock. Actually, there are 2 reasons. Number one, it's only one of 12 slots, which means that even if you buy Metal Skin, for example, instead of buying Stamina Mastery, which is the one that gives you more dashes and more air dashes, it makes you a little bit slower, it means you can't chase people as well and everything like that. But at least from what I'm aware, both of them still give you investment into the green category. You're still getting health from buying both. And additionally, it only takes up 1 slot. So even if you are altering your build slightly and reducing your overall potential damage output and scope of potential as a character, by not buying the Stamina Mastery in this case, you are heavily nullifying the chance of you getting jumped and immediately dying, or you can become a specific counter to a very deadly ultimate like Hayes' ultimate by buying it, and now you're putting a lot of pressure on the enemy to either counter pick you, which is something you can do, but that forces them to modify their build and usually sacrifice 1 or 2 sometimes items to specifically shut down your counter building, or they have to try and mind game you so that you use your Metal Skin before they use their ultimate and stuff like that, which That does tend to happen at higher levels of play, but and anything lower than that, most people can't think that far ahead and don't have the experience to think that far ahead. So you're pretty much granted a complete shutdown to their extremely powerful options. And then as the game goes on, it kind of goes here and then it goes up. Now, admittedly, depending on the character you're playing, this does keep going up because some characters scale infinitely. For example, the Mo and Krill character I mentioned earlier, because he gets health whenever he kills someone while they're in his ultimate, and he can do that as many times as he wants. There's a good chance he will eventually outscale a Haze, for example, who gets no permanent buffs on killing someone. And also, there is a point where you just run out of slots and you reach maximum level and there's not much you can do. This is a thing with both League and Deadlock. It's kind of just a consequence of character design. But yeah, that's shops in both games. Now, something interesting I'm going to look at is the mechanics that are affected by items in League of Legends and the mechanics that are affected by items in Deadlock. And as you can see, Deadlock is a much larger list. And overall, what this is looking at is kind of looking at kind of the scope of what items are able to do in both games. And as you will see, there is a much larger scope for the potential of items in Deadlock compared to League, but that is most likely due to the fact that you don't have, there's more scope with the there's more scope with the items in Deadlock because there's less scope with the characters. What do I mean by this is that most League of Legends characters have their 3 abilities, their ultimate, and the passive tied to them, and then usually that some of their abilities have passives tied to that ability itself, and then they usually have a couple of combos or like specific interactions between 2 abilities and such things. In Deadlock, there isn't really that. Usually you have 3 abilities. For certain characters, their 3rd ability is replaced with a passive. So, for example, Infernus has, in his slot 3, he has, okay, no, not Infernus, Haze. Haze in her slot 3 has a passive where when she shoots people, that applies a debuff that makes her bullets deal more damage to them. But McGinnis, which is a completely different character, doesn't have a passive. Doesn't have a passive ability. Her slot 3 is a wall. She summons a wall and it cuts off the terrain. And so Haze just has one less ability than McGinnis because you only have 4 slots for for things. Admittedly, the abilities still do have inherent passives. Mina, for example, on her first ability, she gets the ability to float if she's aiming down sights while midair. But those are very rare, and there aren't too many of them. So, as I mentioned before, the overall scope of what you can do is overall scope of what characters can do with just their kit, and what they have as their kit is smaller in Deadlock. And then in League, it tends to be much more because of all of the options you have. But in the meantime, the items in League have a smaller scope compared to the ones in Deadlock. They only really affect either damage, status. It's either a flat number, it's applying a status effect onto someone else, or it's either boosting one of your numbers or applying a status effect on someone. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, it's boosting your numbers, applying a status effect onto someone, having more range on various things, having more movement, which is technically a stat, but it's a little more complicated. Better economy, which is something that League almost does not do at all, and then targeted abilities, which is something I will get to later. But let's go through the list in order here. So, first off, the mechanics that are affected by items in League of Legends. First one, damage. Kind of obvious. Second one, additional damage via conditional or status effect. So this would be something like the Faded Ashes from before. You hit someone with an ability, or you deal ability damage to them, they are afflicted with a burn that does damage over time to them. A status effect. This could be something like The anti-heal items, which when you hit an enemy, they now receive 40% less healing from their abilities, allies, health regeneration, etc., etc. Health and resistances. You have more health. You resist more physical damage. You resist more ability damage. Auto attack range. You can attack from further away, either just flat out or with a clause. Usually it's with a clause. Mana and cooldowns. Mana is admittedly something that Deadlock does not do, so it's kind of hard to compare the two. But it usually just means like either you get more mana, you get more damage or other stats based on your mana, or you can restore mana. Or you get better mana restoration. And then cooldowns is usually just ability haste, so your abilities have a shorter cooldown. And then there are a couple of items that are like when you hit attacks, you reduce your cooldowns, or if you get a kill, reduce your ultimate cooldown. Then you have movement speed and conditional movement. Movement speed is very self-explanatory, and then conditional movement would be something like the item Rocket Belt, which is a dash dash that you aim that shoots out a couple of little bolts at enemies. And it's on a cooldown, so you don't have it always, but on characters that either need a second dash or don't have any movement at all, it is not a terrible item to be able to make a little bit of distance from people jumping you. And then you have attack speed, which is very much just you attack more frequently. There is also crit stuff to do with critical hits, but that does fall under damage. Then you have the mechanics affected by items in Deadlock, and this is a much larger list. You have damage. This is your physical damage and ability damage, but this is also melee damage, because Deadlock has a melee system that is separate from you. All characters have a weapon, and they also have a melee. You have health and resistances. So yet again, health is flat health. Resistances is you take less physical damage, you'll take less ability damage. Now, interestingly enough, Deadlock also lets you steal resistances from enemies and or grant them to allies. Usually different items, but you have, for example, the item Spirit Snatch, which is when you punch an enemy, you steal their spirit. You steal their spirit, and you steal their spirit resistance, which means not only do they take more ability damage from you, they deal less ability damage to you, which is something that League, from what I know about League, does not do at all. It's like completely foreign to League, which is probably for a good reason, because that would be a little dangerous. Perhaps it's locked to characters instead of items in League, but it's very interesting because it means that if you're playing like a ability-based character who likes getting up close and personal, you can the item gives you the challenge of weaving in melees into your rotation of abilities to become more resistant to enemies and deal more damage to them. And then granting resistance to allies would be something like the item Heroic Aura, which is that all allies within an area, which I believe is when you activate the ability, all allies within an area gain physical damage resistance, which is it's a situational item. Not every character is going to want this, but for characters like Ivy, who is a more support oriented character, she has an item that is a close range tether that ties her to an ally, or that connects her to an ally. Both of them gain a various amount of stats, but the tether has a maximum range, so because of how her kit works, she's already going to be sitting next to allies, not enemies. She's going to be sitting next to allies. So while she's doing that, she might inherently give them additional physical damage resist by buying that item. Then you have additional damage via conditional or via a conditional or a status effect. Same thing. Mystic Burst is quite literally this. If you deal X damage, the ability then gains an extra amount of damage. Status effects, of which there are a large variety, but keep in mind that it's status effects to allies and enemies, so it could be something like granting your allies a heal over time, or afflicting your enemies with a burn that reduces their incoming healing. Ability and weapon/melee range. This is yet again something that League does not let you do. All abilities have a very fixed maximum range and projectile size, but in Deadlock, partially I suspect because it's 3D and it makes it so that you can choose to have easier to hit abilities, you can make abilities have larger radiuses and larger areas of impact, which for certain abilities is extremely beneficial because you can be less precise, or you're able to affect more enemies with your ability. And then you have weapon and or melee range, which weapon range is the same thing as the auto attack range in League, but interestingly enough, Deadlock has an item called Weighted Shot, which lets you decrease your effective weapon range in exchange for having better damage, and then a couple of other things, which is a very interesting compromise. It's basically telling the player, hey, are you playing a character that wants to get up close and personal and pretty much only works up close and personal? Case in point, the character Mo and Krill from earlier. Mo and Krill does nothing beyond like 25 meters. They literally, they don't work. They have no way to impact characters. So it's basically saying, hey, you, Mo and Krill, you're a character that's only really effective within a short range. But in that short range, you're pretty much always going to be in there because of the way your kit is designed. If you take this item, this is going to benefit you because during the entire time that you're within your effective range, this item is always going to be beneficial to you. So effectively for Mo and Krill, it is just a flat stat boost. It's just free damage for them. And then of course there are items that give you additional weapon range for characters that like to play from a little further away. Then you also have melee range, which is, from what I know, just you get more distance with your melees, which does allow for a decent amount of trickery with getting people to baiting out parries or being able to chase people better with melees, which is it's a level of nuance that I'm not going to get into because it's the wrong video for that. All movement, which, keep in mind, is not just movement speed, but this also includes the amount of stamina you have and how fast the stamina recovers, your slide distance, your movement speed, as I said, but also conditional movement abilities. You have stuff like Warp Stone, which is pretty much Rocket Belt and or similar items from League, but you also have stuff like Phantom Strike, which is pretty much a targeted targeted teleport to an enemy player, and you either deal a large amount of damage to them or you gain a lot of immediate stat boosts. And yet again, for someone like Mo and Krill, that's an excellent item because they're a character that very much wants to be up in people's face. So having an item that lets them skip all of the potential neutral ground where they might have their health chunked out, or they have to commit resources like stamina to try and close the distance, they can just close the distance with one resource, that ability's cooldown, and suddenly they have all of their other cooldowns and resources available to try and kill the enemy, try and kill an objective, clear the wave, intercept them running an objective, or just to get out of a fight, which is really good. Ability cooldowns, as mentioned before, with League, but you also have full resets, which is something League does not allow. You have the items Echo Shard, which lets you fully reset the cooldown of one ability, and you have a Refresher, which fully resets all of your abilities, all the cooldowns of all abilities, including your ultimate and of your items, which means that you can chain items, and that does lead to extremely humorous results where you can chain, for example, one non-ultimate ability 4 times in a row. And for some of them that are very powerful but have very long cooldowns, yes, you are committing Refresher's 5-minute cooldown for that, but it could be enough to completely swing a fight in your favor. And another interesting thing is that you can get longer ability durations in Deadlock, which yet again is something that League does not allow you to do. And this affects a number of things, actually. This can be self-buffs last for longer, debuffs on enemies last for longer, the ability itself lasts for longer, So, for example, the character Vindicta has a flight ability that lets her go into the air temporarily and gains a couple stat boosts while she's there. With an extension to duration, she can now do that for longer, which means that she has more time in which she's extremely oppressive to the enemy, and that means that even though that item isn't actually, it's not giving her more damage, it's not giving her faster cooldowns and everything like that, because she's able to stay in that flight for longer. She gains more power because she's able to be oppressive for longer, and she's able to ward the enemies off or force them to make bad decisions or overcommit if they want to make a play. Now, the next one, economy, is something that League really does not mess with. There are very, very few sources of additional gold in the game, or additional currency in League, and most of them are very small amounts. It's pretty much the same as killing one melee minion, which is not very much gold. And then or the ones that do give a good amount, like cashback, for example, which is a rune that you can equip, it gives you a percentage of the money you spend on tier 3 items back. So it's a pretty hefty amount, but you have to be spending a large amount of money to make effect of it. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, you can just get more money for free. You have the Cult of Sacrifice that I was talking about before, which is just you pick an NPC and you get like 1.5 times their value in souls, which is the currency. But you also have Trophy Collector, which is an item where if you get kills or assists on enemies, you gain money over time and a 1% stat boost to like ability range and movement speed, which it stacks up though. So at maximum stacks, it's plus 15% ability range, which is not bad. And then you also have the newest one, which is Golden Goose Egg, which is a item that you keep in your inventory over time. And while you have the item, you deal 10% less damage, like across the board. But when you activate the item, you get a fairly large influx of currency, and you get a lot of the like golden statue buffs, which I'm not going to get into because that's a topic for a different video, but more or less they're like very small versions of the dragon buffs from League. It's like 1/3 of what the dragon buffs offer. Let's see. Next one is all weapon attributes, and this is something that they can't really do in League because most of the characters don't really have an ammo system, and well, they don't really have weapons. Obviously some of them do, but usually the only distinction between weapons is, are they melee or are they ranged? Meanwhile, in Deadlock, you can have better attack speed, you can have better ammo count, you can have better reloads. So, for example, the Quicksilver reload item from before, which lets you completely bypass a reload, and the upgrade, which lets you bypass a reload and you get a large boost in additional, like all your bullets now deal additional spirit damage, and you have faster fire rate for that magazine, and bullet speed, which, as I mentioned before, with weighted shots, lets you kind of gauge, lets you change your weapon based off of how you want to play and the distances that your character plays at. And then the last one is something that League doesn't do, I don't think. It might have done this in the past, but it is targeted abilities towards enemies/allies. Now, I know the redemption exists in League, but that is not a targeted ability. You place that on the map, and whoever's standing in the area gets blasted with it. No, what I mean with target abilities is something like Cursed Relic, which is very much you pick a specific target and then it affects them. And what this means is that you can usually these are debuff abilities, and what it means is that you can pick a specifically dangerous character or a character that you are specifically weak to, and in the case that they decide to jump you or they are focusing you in a fight, you can, at the cost of an ability cooldown and at the cost of an ability slot, pretty much nullify them and either give yourself enough time to get a kill and get out, or just bail from a fight entirely, or retaliate with a different ability and try to flip the tempo so that they're on the back foot and they have to retreat or commit cooldowns. Now, something interesting that I have noticed between the two games is that, yet again, going back to the power spike versus iteration design of these two games, is how cash allocation works in the two games. Here in League of Legends, we have a very not reasonable, but a fairly realistic fight between two characters. You have Riven, a bruiser character, top lane, and you have Aatrox, a different bruiser character, also top lane. This is slightly dated but very plausible interaction between both of them. Riven, both of these characters have 3,300 gold to work with. Riven has enough to buy 1 Death Dance. Aatrox has enough to buy 3 pickaxes and 2 long swords, and then a little bit of change left over because it's not quite right. Maybe he has enough for another long sword. I couldn't quite do the math. But as you can see here, just even though they have the exact same amount of money, because Riven decided to spend that money on a tier 3 item instead of the tier 1 items like Aatrox, they are getting a pretty big boost in terms of what they can do. They gain 60% physical damage, which translates over into their entire kit. It's a boost to all of their abilities and their damage overall. They gain 15 ability haste, which means they have faster abilities, which is something that a bruiser character wants. Both of these guys want ability haste, but Riven especially benefits from it. They gain 50 armor, which for the sake of this experiment more or less means they have an extra 500 health versus Aatrox, because Aatrox deals physical damage. They have the 30% damage difference that I talked about before, which means that all of the damage the Aatrox will be dealing, 30% of it is stored over time as a bleed, and they have a heal on kill. So even if, let's say, the Riven were to be ambushed by the Aatrox, not the Aatrox, but like their jungler and everything like that, and they managed to get the kill on the Aatrox during this ambush, they could very realistically turn the 2 versus 1 ambush into a double kill for the Riven. Meanwhile, with the same amount of money, the Aatrox can buy an assortment of tier 1 items, and the Aatrox gains 95 damage. They have 50% more damage than the Riven, but they have so many less, so much less value from the way that they spent their money, that the Riven is almost always, keep in mind this is a scenario where it's the same level, same skill, and everything like that. But because of the way that the money has been allocated in League, because of the fact that the game incentivizes the large tier 3 items and how they power spike, the Riven here just flat out takes the advantage and is going to pretty much always win this trade given the current distribution of money. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, you can have the same thing, and it's not the same. So here we have two characters. We have Lady Geist, damage dealer who deals a decent amount of self-damage with her abilities, and you have Haze, the character I was talking about before, who's kind of just a shoot the enemy character. So both of these characters are given 3,200 souls, which is the currency to work with. Lady Geist buys the item Radiant Regeneration. What this item does is that it gives you healing. So every 10 seconds, or it's every 8 seconds or so, your next ability heals you, and whenever you deal ability damage to an enemy, you get a pretty hefty chunk of health back. Meanwhile, the Haze, because she does not benefit from Radiant Regeneration, she's going to buy a couple of other things. So she's going to buy Swift Striker, which is bonus fire rate. Haze benefits from this because her passive means that the more bolts she lands on characters, the more damage her guns do. The item Extra Stamina, which gives her +1 stamina, so she can dash more, she can do more dash jumps, and overall more movement. And she has the item Rusted Barrel, which is a targeted ability that affects, in this case, the Lady Geist, and gives her -40% fire rate for 10 seconds or something like that. Now, because of the way that they've distributed this, Lady Geist gets her healing from this, and she also gets a moderate boost to her damage because she's made a 3,200 souls investment in the purple category. Haze has made a 1,600 investment in the orange, an 800 investment in the green, and an 800 investment in the purple. Now, if this were League, as you can see here, this is the same scenario of League. as League, where you have one large item and here a variety of smaller items. But in this scenario, both of these characters, assuming it's the same level of skill, same levels and everything like that, and none and yeah, same level of skill and everything like that, both of these characters are actually pretty matched, and it would be a fairly even fight, with neither of them having a real advantage. And the reason for this is that both of them are buying items that specifically tailor to what their character needs. Lady Geist needs a lot of healing. Her abilities deal a lot of damage to herself, so she either needs to mitigate that damage, or she needs to get the health back either from stealing it from enemies or through self-healing, so either lifesteal or self-healing, and this is what regeneration gives her. It's actually it's a fantastic item on Geist because it pretty much nullifies, but makes the downsides of her self damage on her abilities pretty much zero. So she has now come online as a character. She's able to more or less freely use her abilities within reason against enemies without having to worry about the damage penalties to herself. Meanwhile, Haze is pretty much already online as a character. She doesn't need much to work with. So instead, she's going to focus on getting things that benefit her and that would suit her. She gets bonus fire rate because that boosts her passive. She gets bonus stamina because that makes it easier for her to chase targets or get out of bad situations. And she buys Rusted Barrel so that when she's fighting an enemy, they can't deal quite as much damage to her. And in a scenario like this, whoever's going to win the fight is a complete 50-50 because because of the fact that even though Radiant Regeneration is a more expensive item, it's not inherently better than the combination of items Haze has. And this makes for a very interesting dichotomy where this could be a very slightly odd but very plausible thing to see in a real match of Deadlock, where you have the Geist who saves up, does not buy any cheap items, and first item buys Radiant Regeneration, and then the Haze who buys this section of items, and both of them would be building correctly for their characters because they're building towards what their character needs, and neither of them are in actual disadvantage from this. And this makes for very, very interesting kind of tactical decision making and a lot of depth available to a player who does Deadlock, or a player in a Deadlock game, because it's a lot of thinking on the fly of what do I need in this moment and what would I benefit from. Meanwhile, in League, it's a lot more of what do I have planned out and when should I start thinking about maybe altering it. Now, how does this impact the game? Well, in League of Legends, overall, the item system leads to specific intervals of power spikes based off of wave management and kills. Certain characters need 1, 2, or 3 items to come online and be properly functional. This is what I was talking about beforehand. The efficiency of a character depends on the power spike that they are sat at, and having a power spike item such as a something like Death's Dance can very much make it so that even though you have same levels and the same skill as an enemy, you will win in a fight because you have a power spike item. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, it's a lot more fluid power spikes, where it depends on the player's decisions and build routing as well if they decide to counter buy or not. How online a build is depends on your routing and timing to hit shops, so it depends on the routes you take throughout the jungle, if you decide to go for kills, or if you're ducking back into lane to grab souls, which you should be doing, as well as refining the minimum parts needed for it to work. And this is actually a skill that people have talked about, but I don't think is talked about enough, is that the fact that a part of getting better at Deadlock is understanding what is the bare essentials that I need for my character to come online, and then where can I start branching out a bit and then modifying based off what the game needs and what I can go for. For example, with the Geist, you pretty much you will learn over time that it's pretty much always a good idea to just pretty much rush Radiant Regeneration because it makes your self-damage so much less of an issue that you have so much more freedom to use and you don't have to worry about your health when you're trying to deal damage to enemies. Meanwhile, with someone like Haze, it's a lot more adaptable on what is the enemy doing, what is the enemy building, what is the enemy going for, etc., etc. Anyways, in conclusion, I think that both of the ways that these games do items is very curious, and it makes for a lot of skill expression actually, where in League, it's a lot of skill expression in how you manage the gold that you get in your income and how you time your recalls and also play around knowing when you'll get specific items and then being able to leverage those power spikes over enemies who don't quite have the power spike just yet, and being able to use that where even if you might be down in experience or perhaps not quite as skilled of a player, or perhaps the enemy character is better, is just statistically is statistically favored in the matchup against yours, because you have that power spike, you are greatly at a much greater advantage. Meanwhile, in Deadlock, it's a lot more fluid, and a lot more of the skill expression in the building is knowing what the key essentials of your build are, and then also knowing when to diversify into other categories, and also exploring and kind of seeing what items you can branch out into categories that, even if you might be a physical damage based characters, what like purple, so spirit category items do you want to go for, and should you be considering or you should be considering to not only get the investment but also be benefiting your overall weapon damage output. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I highly recommend that you guys put your thoughts down in the comments below, and as well as your overall just opinions. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm very glad to start talking about them, as long as it's a civil discussion. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I will see you all someday later. Bye bye.